On a February morning in 2004, a trail camera mounted on a fence post at the edge of a Sanilac County farm in Michigan's Lower Peninsula captured a sequence of photographs that nobody expected to see. The morning light was flat and pale across a snow-dusted field. A stand of bare birch trees ran along the fence line, and moving out of that tree line and across the open field, unhurried and deliberate, was an animal that did not belong there by any measure that wildlife officials had on record. The animal was low to the ground and broad across the shoulders. Its legs were short and heavily muscled. Its back was wide and slightly arched, and the fur along its sides was pale and thick against the darker fur running down the spine. The tail was thick at the base and spread into a fan of bristled dark fur. The animal moved with a plantigrade gait, putting its full heel down with each step the way a small bear does, crossing the exposed field in a slow rolling walk and then disappearing into the frozen tree line without looking back. The photographs were sent to a Michigan Department of Natural Resources wildlife biologist. The biologist studied the posture, the proportions, the movement across the frames. The identification required no guesswork. What the Sanilac County camera had recorded, in the middle of Michigan's agricultural Lower Peninsula, in a county where the land is flat and heavily farmed and wildlife corridors are narrow, was a wolverine. Gulo gulo. An animal not confirmed in Michigan's Lower Peninsula for close to 200 years. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources was notified. Wildlife officials examined the photographs and confirmed the identification as solid. A wild wolverine had been documented on farmland in Sanilac County. It was real. It was wild. And it had moved through that landscape as if it had done so before. The easy explanation was a captive animal that had escaped. No reports of missing wolverines came in. No private facility reported a lost animal. The wolverine in the photographs moved without the disorientation of a captive animal suddenly in unfamiliar open terrain. It moved with the settled confidence of an animal that knew exactly where it was going. It would have been a remarkable isolated case, a biological footnote filed and set aside. Except that it was not the only one. The Sanilac County wolverine came back, multiple times. Over the following years, trail cameras and field observations in and around the same area documented the same animal, or an animal with the same physical profile, moving through the county repeatedly. Wildlife researchers accumulated a file of confirmed photographs. The animal lived in that region through multiple Michigan winters, surviving on what Sanilac County's agricultural flatlands and patches of woodlot could offer, which, according to everything wildlife science said about wolverine habitat requirements, was close to nothing. And then the reports began arriving from farther north. The Michigan Upper Peninsula has a long history of informal wolverine reports, the kind that come from trappers and hunters and backcountry hikers who spend months at a time in remote terrain, the people with the most contact with deep wilderness, who also receive the least institutional credibility when they report something unusual. Through the 1980s and the 1990s, and into the 2000s, scattered accounts emerged from the forested interior of the Upper Peninsula, from the cedar swamps and spruce corridors west of Senni, and along the ridgelines above Lake Superior. An animal described as large, dark, and low-shouldered. Moving alone. Moving fast. Most of those accounts were filed as unverified and set aside. One sighting is an anecdote. Then in 2008, a trail camera in Oneida County, Wisconsin, documented a wolverine. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources confirmed the sighting. First confirmed wolverine in Wisconsin in living memory, moving through the state's northern lake country in the general direction of Lake Superior and the Michigan border. 7 accounts across 2 decades, in 2 adjacent states, in terrain that connects through continuous boreal forest. One sighting is an anecdote. 7 accounts across a region confirmed by separate agencies with separate equipment in separate years is a pattern. And a pattern in a species that was supposed to be absent from this part of the continent altogether is the kind of thing that deserves more than a note in the margin. To understand what is actually at stake in these sightings, it helps to understand exactly what kind of animal has been showing up on these cameras. Gulo gulo. The wolverine, the genus name, translates from Latin as the glutton, and that name is not casual. It refers to a documented feeding strategy that wildlife biologists describe with a kind of professional admiration. Wolverines have been recorded opening frozen moose carcasses that would require heavy equipment for a human to access. They crack femur bones from large ungulates to extract the marrow inside. They cache food beneath snow in quantities large enough to last weeks, returning to those caches across territories that stretch across hundreds of square miles. They have been observed driving gray wolves away from fresh kills, holding a carcass site against animals many times their size by sheer ferocity and persistence. An adult male wolverine weighs between 12 and 18 kilograms. It stands roughly 45 centimeters at the shoulder. By any raw measurement, it is a mid-sized predator. What makes it exceptional is what its behavior suggests about the relationship between body size and ecological confidence. Wolverines do not behave as if they are 12-kilogram animals in a landscape occupied by wolves and bears and cougars. The skull is built around a single rotated rear molar, specifically adapted to shear through frozen flesh and bone, a feature found in no other North American mustelid. The feet are proportionally enormous relative to body weight, wide snowshoe-like pads that distribute mass across snow surfaces and allow the animal to move efficiently in conditions that slow or stop most other predators. The wolverine is not slowed by winter. It uses winter as an advantage. Michigan's relationship with this animal is long, official, and almost entirely symbolic. The state has been called the Wolverine State since before statehood. The University of Michigan adopted the wolverine as its mascot in the 1800s. Wolverine imagery is on state merchandise, state materials, state signage. But wolverines were already becoming a rarity in Michigan when European settlers arrived in significant numbers. The Lower Peninsula lost its wolverine population by roughly the middle of the 1800s, pushed out by expanding agriculture, unregulated trapping, and the systematic conversion of forests to farmland. The Upper Peninsula held on longer, in the stories at least, but no confirmed breeding population has been documented in the state in the modern era. The official classification is extirpated. Not extinct globally. Gone locally. Gone from here, as of the records available. As of the surveys conducted. As of the moment someone last looked carefully enough to confirm. Extirpated is not a permanent condition. It is a description of a point in time. Points in time change. The nearest confirmed wolverine breeding populations occupy the boreal forests of Ontario, Canada. The southern edge of that range sits approximately 250 miles north of the Upper Peninsula's Lake Superior shoreline. That distance sounds significant when you look at it on a map. It becomes less significant when you understand what the species has been documented doing in terms of solo movement. Lake Superior lies between Ontario and the Upper Peninsula, and the obvious assumption is that 2,300 square miles of cold, deep freshwater constitutes an impassable barrier. But the overland route matters more than the open water. The western edge of Michigan's Upper Peninsula connects through Wisconsin to Minnesota, and Minnesota shares a continuous border with Ontario and Manitoba. A wolverine moving southwest from the southern edge of Ontario's boreal forest through northern Minnesota and Wisconsin travels entirely through forested wolf-occupied terrain. The corridor is not a wilderness highway. But it is traversable. It is exactly the kind of fragmented but continuous boreal landscape that dispersing wolverines have been documented using in other parts of their North American range. The 2000 Ocoee, Wisconsin sighting suggests that at least one animal used it. What would a wolverine find in Michigan's Upper Peninsula if it arrived? The western Upper Peninsula contains more than 1 million acres of national forest. The Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park protects nearly 60,000 acres of old-growth northern hardwood and mixed conifer forest along the Lake Superior shoreline. The interior of the Upper Peninsula holds vast expanses of cedar swamp and spruce fir forest, the same habitat type wolverines use in the southern margin of their Canadian range. Snowshoe hare populations cycle through the same boom and bust patterns that wolverine populations track across their core range in Canada. White-tailed deer, abundant throughout the Upper Peninsula, provide a reliable carrion source through winter months when wolverines depend heavily on scavenging. Annual snowpack in the heaviest zones of the Upper Peninsula averages between 100 and 200 centimeters, enough to support the subnivean dens that female wolverines require for successful reproduction. A habitat assessment of Michigan's Upper Peninsula would not describe it as ideal wolverine territory. The honest description, the one that appears in the peer-reviewed literature on wolverine range modeling, is marginal. Marginal means the conditions exist at the lower edge of what the species reliably requires. Marginal means survival is possible. Marginal is not zero. If you have followed this case this far, and if you find yourself in the category of people who pay attention to the wildlife stories that official science has not fully resolved, subscribe to this channel. This is what it covers. The case is still open. The animals still moving through terrain they are not supposed to occupy. There are more of them than the maps suggest, and if you have ever spent time in the Upper Peninsula in winter, moving through the spruce forest between Taquamenon and Sini, and seen something large and low-shouldered at the edge of a cedar swamp that your brain filed away as a trick of the light before moving on, drop that in the comments. Tell me where you were watching from. The question of viability does not end with habitat assessment. It continues with what the species has been documented doing elsewhere under comparable conditions. In 2000 Nueve, a male wolverine designated M56 in a Wyoming telemetry study made a solo journey that changed how biologists thought about dispersal in this species. M56 had been fitted with a GPS collar in the Wind River Range. His recorded movement took him from Wyoming south through Colorado, crossing interstate highways and exposed ridgelines with minimal snow cover and irrigated agricultural basins that bore no resemblance to wolverine habitat in any textbook. The total documented distance of his confirmed journey exceeded 500 miles. M56 was not following a predefined corridor. He was navigating a fragmented modern landscape with a level of mobility that the species' official range maps did not predict. M56 was eventually found dead in Colorado. His presence there was not expected. The evidence that he had traveled that distance came from the collar data, not from any conventional detection method. Without that collar, M56 would not have appeared in any database. His journey would not be documented. The scientific record would show no wolverine in Colorado, and that absence would be accurate in the sense that no wolverine had been confirmed, and entirely misleading in the sense that a wolverine had in fact been there. The history of North American wildlife is not a stable inventory. It is a record of what was detected, by whom, with what equipment, in which locations, in which years. The record and the reality are not always the same document. The black-footed ferret was declared extinct in the wild in 1979, following decades of habitat loss and plague die-offs across the American Great Plains. In 1981, a ranch dog in Metis, Wyoming, brought a dead animal back to its owner. The owner did not recognize the species. A biologist was eventually called. The dead animal was a black-footed ferret. The colony at Metis turned out to be the last wild population, entirely undiscovered by any survey, surviving in prairie dog towns on private ranch land that no federal survey program had assessed. The animal was not extinct. It had simply been in a place where no one with a clipboard had looked. The coyote's expansion east of the Mississippi River is another case that biologists of the early 20th century would have called impossible. Coyotes were western grassland animals. They occupied the open country west of the Mississippi. The forested east, with its topography and prey community and already established predator guild, was not coyote habitat by any prevailing ecological model. By 2000, coyotes had established breeding populations in every eastern state. They were hunting deer in suburban New Jersey and moving through green spaces in downtown Chicago. The models were not wrong about the ecology. They were wrong about the animal's flexibility. The eastern cougar was declared officially extinct by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service in 2001, Since that declaration, confirmed cougar sightings have been recorded in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Michigan. A cougar photographed in Connecticut in Dose Mill once was genetically analyzed and traced to a population in South Dakota. The animal had traveled more than 1,500 miles east across the American Midwest. The agency declared the eastern cougar extinct, and the population in South Dakota continued sending individuals east regardless. These are not stories about exceptions. They are stories about how animals move relative to how institutions track them. Honesty requires saying plainly what the skeptics get right. The skeptical case against an established wolverine presence in Michigan is not weak. It is reasonable, and it deserves a direct answer. The skeptic asks, if wolverines are present in Michigan, why is there no consistent photographic record? Why no confirmed kills? Why no DNA evidence? Why, in a state with a significant trail camera presence from hunters alone, is the evidence limited to one documented case from 2004 and a scattered history of informal reports? The answer comes in three parts, and not one of them requires the wolverine to be absent. The first part is coverage. Michigan's Upper Peninsula has a land area of roughly diocese 1,000 square miles. The active, monitored wildlife camera stations, operated by research institutions and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, are distributed across specific zones, targeting specific species. The overwhelming majority of camera effort is directed at white-tailed deer, black bears, and gray wolves, the species with active management programs and dedicated monitoring budgets. A solitary predator with a documented home range of up to 900 square miles, moving through terrain with no active wolverine monitoring program, may cross any given camera station once every several months. 70 cameras distributed across 16,000 square miles of boreal forest and wetland is not a survey. It is a sample of specific points in a very large space. An animal that moves through the gaps between those points does not enter the record. The absence is real. The inference that the absence means the animal is not there is not. The second part is classification. Wildlife agency reporting systems are built around species that are confirmed to be present. When a report arrives describing an animal matching wolverine morphology in a region where wolverines are classified as extirpated, the report enters a system that has no active investigation category for it. Reports are coded as unverified or filed as probable misidentification without follow-up. The logic is circular in a way that produces consistent silence. A wolverine sighting cannot be confirmed because confirmation requires investigation, and investigation is not initiated because the animal is not confirmed to be present. The classification drives the outcome. The circular structure makes that outcome self-perpetuating. The third part is preservation. Wolverines that die in the field in Michigan's Upper Peninsula die in dense boreal forest and wetland, in conditions that decompose soft tissue rapidly in warm months and bury carcasses in accumulated snowpack in cold months. The probability of a field biologist or hunter or hiker encountering wolverine remains in the Upper Peninsula, absent a directed search with trained scent dogs in specific terrain, is extremely low. Dense forest does not preserve its inventory for human inspection. An animal can be real, can live for years, can die of natural causes, and can leave no physical evidence that any survey will ever find. The absence of a body is not a confirmation that the animal was never there. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That phrase is not a rhetorical deflection. It is a precise description of how detection systems work in large, complex ecosystems with limited monitoring resources and institutional categories built around confirmed rather than probable presence. Go back to that Sanilac County farm on a February morning in 2004. Go back to that trail camera on a fence post at the edge of a birch stand, the snow-flattened pale across the open field. The camera did not misidentify what it recorded. The wildlife biologist who reviewed the photographs did not misidentify what they showed. What was there was there. A wolverine crossing agricultural flatland in Michigan's Lower Peninsula, 200 miles from the nearest terrain anyone would call suitable habitat, moving with the unhurried, deliberate gait of an animal that knows exactly where it is going. That animal lived in Sanilac County through multiple winters. It survived on what that landscape provided. It was eventually captured alive and died in captivity in 2010. For the years it was there, documented repeatedly by cameras and eventually by researchers in the field, it occupied territory that no wolverine was supposed to occupy. It did not know it was not supposed to be there. It was there anyway. Michigan still does not recognize an established wolverine population. The word extirpated still appears in the relevant documents. The species range map still ends several hundred miles north of the Upper Peninsula shore. But somewhere in the spruce forest west of Senni, in the cedar swamp corridors north of Escanaba, in the remote wolf territories along the Wisconsin border, where trail cameras record movement in the pre-dawn hours of February mornings, and the photographs are not always easy to categorize, something is crossing the snow. Not enough to confirm, not enough to dismiss. The question is not whether the wolverine has returned to Michigan. The question is whether Michigan was ever truly empty of them, or whether we simply stopped looking at the right time of year, in the right terrain, with the right equipment, and called the silence an answer when the silence was only what the silence had always been. The forest keeping its own records, in its own time, entirely without our involvement.